Did you know what the first German army uniform looked like? People in uniform exude a unique air of authority. Stay tuned and keep watching to see how the German army uniforms evolved through the years. 1933. In early 1933, the armed forces of the Weimar Republic were near the end of a 2-year project to redesign the Army Feldbluse, or field blouse. That year, the new tunic was issued to the Reichsheer and then the rapidly growing Wehrmacht Heer, although minor design changes continued to be made after that. 1934. The original softcover of the Heer, introduced in 1934, was a folding garrison or envelope capped in feldgrau wool, similar to that worn by American, Soviet, and RAF personnel, but with a scoop in the front. The Panzer and tropical uniforms issued variants in black wool and olive cotton. At the same time, the M34 side cap was introduced for enlisted wear, and the foldable field cap for officers was authorized. This cap had a crown of a significantly smaller diameter without the wire stiffener, a soft band, and a visor of flexible leather or feldgrau wool. Insignias were jacquard woven. The dress, service, and walking out cap for all ranks was the peaked cap as finalized in 1934. The semi-rigid band was covered in bottle green fabric, and the stiff visor came in a variety of materials and was made of either black, vulcanized rubber, fiber, plastic, or patent leather. The oval wool crown was stiffened with wire into a curved saddleback shape with the high font. Insignia consisted of the national cockade surrounded by an oak leaf wreath on the front of a band, with the Wehrmacht Sadler above. These were stamped aluminum or sometimes embroidered in bullion for officers. Officers' caps were frequently private purchased, had covers of higher quality fabric, were often interchangeable, and included summer white and tropical olive versions as well as feldgrau. 1935. In 1935, the Wehrmacht adopted a lower, lighter version of the M1916/18 coal scuttle helmet. This became the ubiquitous German helmet of World War II, worn by all branches of the Wehrmacht and SS, police, fire brigades, and party organizations. Heer helmets were originally painted apple green, a semi-gloss feldgrau somewhat darker than the uniform color, while wartime factory and field painting covered a gamut from very dark black green to slate gray to olive green, increasingly in matte or textured paint to eliminate reflections. The Waffenrock military coat then descended from that introduced by the Prussian army in earlier years and rapidly adopted by the other German states. In its Wehrmacht form was a form-fitting thigh-length 8-button tunic of fine feldgrau wool, without external pockets. The collar was taller than the service tunic and bore more elaborate litzen, embroidered all in silver white and mounted on Waffenfarbe backing. Smaller Ärmelplatten, similar in appearance to litzen, appeared under the buttons on the dark green Swedish cuffs. Waffenfarbe piping also edged the collar, cuffs, front closure, and scalloped rear vent. Officers wore a formal belt of silver braid. Trousers were steingrau, with outer seams piped in Waffenfarbe. In the full-dress uniform, the Waffenrock was worn with medals, exude, officers, trousers and shoes, the Schirmmütze, gloves and sword, officers/senior NCOs, or dress bayonet, enlisted. Parade dress substituted the steel helmet and jackboots. Semi-formal and walking-out uniforms were as full dress, but without exude and with ribbons replacing medals. 1936. Originally, the M1936 tunic was worn with the same stone gray trousers that the Reichswehr had introduced in earlier years. These were high-waisted, straight-legged button-fly trousers with suspenders, 3 internal pockets, and a watch pocket. They were worn tucked into jackboots in the field. The M36 tunic still retained the traditional Imperial Reichswehr uniform color of gray-green field gray wool, but incorporated 4 front patch pockets with scalloped flaps and pleats. Note that on Reichswehr tunics, the lower pockets were internal and angled. The front was closed with 5 buttons rather than the previous 8, and the collar and shoulder straps were of a dark bottle green instead of a Reichswehr gray. Compared to the Weimar-era uniforms, the skirt of the Feldbluse was shorter, and the tailoring was more form-fitting due to Germany's adoption of mechanized warfare, as soldiers now spent much time in the confined space of a vehicle and a shorter jacket was less likely to pick up dirt from the seats. The M36 was produced and issued until the very end of the war, though successive patterns became predominant. As for greatcoats, field gray double-breasted greatcoats with dark green collars and shoulder strap were introduced this year. It was worn by all ranks below general officers. Generals and field marshals wore a variant with scarlet turnback lapels and gold buttons. 1937. In 1937, officers were authorized with the optional purchase of the ornamented or piped uniform to be worn as a less formal alternative to the Waffenrock for walking out and some ceremonial occasions. The M37 Feldbluse was identical to the M35 service tunic, except that the collar and the litzen were the same as the Waffenrock, and the collar, closure, and cuffs were piped in a Waffenfarbe. It was worn with the piped dress trousers. Officers and certain senior NCOs had the option of wearing a white cotton tunic from April through September. The Reichswehr old-style model had a stand collar, a 6-button front, and plain sleeves. The newer model introduced in 1937 had a rise and fall collar, an 8-button front, and French cuffs, and was authorized as a summer walking out and undress uniform. Both versions had removable buttons, shoulder boards, and a metal breast eagle to permit laundering. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to see more evolution content. 1938. Officers' caps M38 were piped in as silver or aluminum and gold for generals. A foldable field cap for officers was officially replaced by the officers' Schiffchen M38 with a wear-out date of the 1st of April 1942, but this order was generally ignored and the popular Knautschmütze was worn throughout the war, coming to be known as the Altre Art, old-style field cap. Officers and NCOs in the field would sometimes remove the wire stiffener from the Schirmmütze to achieve a crush look, especially tank crewmen. 1940. The M40 uniform was the first design change in the standard army uniform. It differed from the M36 only in substituting feldgrau for the bottle green collar and shoulder straps, which began to be phased out in the previous year. Though most combat examples show this variation appearing in 1940, hence the unofficial M40 pattern. The troops liked the older green collars, and M40 tunics modified with salvaged M36 collars or bottle green collar overlays are not uncommon. That year, contractors were ordered to discontinue the manufacture of Steingrau fabric and instead produce trousers from the same feldgrau cloth as the tunic. However, army depots continued to issue existing stocks and the older dark trousers were still frequently seen. Production and issue of the Waffenrock were suspended in 1940, and either the service or the officer's ornamented uniform was worn for dress occasions instead. However, the Waffenrock remained authorized for walking out for those who had or could purchase it, and it was a widespread, if unauthorized practice to loan a soldier a Waffenrock from regimental stocks to get married in, as evidenced by many wartime wedding photos. From 1940, the M37 replaced the Waffenrock for formal and ceremonial dress. 1941. The M41 is exactly the same as the M40, but with a 6-button front due to the decline of material quality, which by now was 50% more viscose rayon and recycled shoddy. SS-specific uniforms nonetheless stayed with 5 buttons. 1942. The M42 is essentially an M40/41 tunic, with pleats removed from all the pockets to save on materials and production time. A new design of field trousers was introduced in 1942, replacing the old World War I style of straight-legged Langhosen. New features included tapered ankles, a reinforced seat, and a straight-cut waist, which included belt loops and 2 tabs for optional suspender use, as opposed to the fishtail design of the M36 model. HBT models often were straight-legged and featured a tab and buttons to taper to the ankles for optional use without gaiters. A variant of the officer's caps appeared in 1942 with a 2-part fold intended to serve as ear flaps in cold weather, secured by 2 front buttons. In the same year, the Army began issuing camouflage helmet covers, first in Splittertarnmuster, splinter pattern, and then in Schumpftarnmuster, swamp/marsh or water pattern. Soldiers would cover their helmets with netting or chicken wire into which foliage could be inserted. 1943. The M43 saw the removal of all pleats and scalloped flaps from the field tunic, and pockets began to be cut straight rather than with rounded edges. Many M43 tunics were made with a much simplified version of the internal suspension system or omitted entirely. The General's Gray Coat, which belongs to General Erich Schneider, was made in Mannheim in 1943. In the late war, lower quality, often recycled material was being used for uniforms. The M43 trousers saw extra fly buttons being added to accommodate a reinforced waistband. All other features remained virtually the same, Before World War I, German and Austrian mountain troops had worn a visored ski cap with turned-down ear flaps secured in front by 2 buttons. A version of this cap with a longer visor, false turn-down, and slightly lower crown in olive cotton twill had been issued with the tropical uniform. In 1943, a similar cap in field gray wool with a visor intermediate in length between the mountain and tropical versions was issued to all troops for the field wear only. It quickly became the most commonly seen soft headgear at the front. 1944. In late 1944, to cut down on tailoring and production costs, the Wehrmacht introduced the M44 pattern uniform. Similar in appearance to the British battle dress, the M44 was unlike any other German pattern uniform and the first major deviation in uniform design since 1936. The tunic skirt was shortened to waist length, an internal belt was added, and the tunic could be worn with an open or closed collar. The color was the new feldgrau 44, a drab greenish brown. The rarely used and complicated internal suspension system was finally dropped. 1990. In 1990, the NVA was integrated into the Bundeswehr, and their old uniforms are discarded in favor of modern combat fatigues decorated with Flecktarn camouflage patterns. Visit Evolution Zone and watch our other videos if you enjoyed this one.